Ladies and gentlemen, here is Led Zeppelin.
Messrs. Bonham, Jones, Page and Plant. Led Zeppelin.
Ladies and gentlemen, the American return of Led Zeppelin.
All right, episode 27. My name is Mark McFall. You are listening to the Zepfan All Things Led Zeppelin podcast. For those of you interested in Zepfan merchandise, please check out Etsy or eBay. You could search a Zepfan store and find it. We have some cool Zepfan shirts and some mugs. We also have some really awesome Led Zeppelin shirts, some Jimmy Page style, some Robert Plant style. Definitely check that out. Our YouTube channel, please check it out. You could search Mark Zepp on YouTube. If you have any Led Zeppelin or Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, Page Plant, John Paul Jones masters, please reach out to me at contact@zepfan.com. I'm a huge video fan, as most of you know. Memorabilia collectors, zepfan.com has it all. 6,000 items, over 6,000 items on display. We have magazines, books, songbooks, fanzines, cassettes, 8 tracks, 4 tracks, LPs, singles, all the Led Zeppelin memorabilia you could think of. We have memorabilia from all the sections of their releases, from remasters, box sets, BBC sessions, Song Remains the Same, Mothership. We have it all. Check it out. Any questions, comments, concerns, reach out to me at contact@zepfan.com. That is all the logistics out of the way. Let's begin. Since 1973, Steve Rosen has written and spoken with musical legends ranging from AC/DC, Aerosmith, Alice Cooper, The Who, Pink Floyd, The Beach Boys, Van Halen, Led Zeppelin, and ZZ Top. He has written 16 cover stories for Guitar Player magazine, 8 cover stories for Guitar World magazine. With over 1,000 interviews, his work has graced the pages of dozens of iconic publications, including Rolling Stones, Los Angeles Times, Playboy, Musician, Guitar Player, Guitar World, Cream, Circus, Player, Total Guitar, Classic Rock, Mojo, Drum, and of course, that list goes on. He's also authored several books, including biographies of Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath, Free and Bad Company, Prince, Bruce Springsteen, Randy Rhoads, and his latest work, the 3rd edition of ToneChaser, a deeply personal account of his 26-year friendship with Eddie Van Halen. He's here today with us to discuss his incredible career, his new book, and share his experience of interviewing Jimmy Page in 1977 and 1986, and he was on the Starship. So with that, all that being said, Steve, welcome, dude. How's everything going today?
Mark, how are you? I'm doing great, man. Was really looking forward to this. Man, I got some crazy Zepp stories.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. That's a great way to kick it off. You know, I have to say, I was doing your bio on this and I'm looking at this. I'm like, you know, Jimmy Page is just like a little sliver of your career. I mean, the what you've done and who you interviewed. I mean, you've lived a lifetime of meeting these iconic people. And I consider writing in the 70s would have to do something with being a DJ in the 70s. You have this hierarchy that everyone would look up to. I mean, just briefly, what was that experience like being around all these musicians in the 70s? That was the scene back then.
You know, man, it was an amazing time. I was lucky that I began my career back then in the early 70s, because that was sort of the nascent period for all those music magazines.
Right.
Guitar Player had only been out, I think the first issue was 69, 70, 71. Guitar World, I think, was a little bit later. You know, but it was a burgeoning scene. I mean, the print media was definitely king, and they all needed somebody to write stories, and they were all looking for outside freelancers. And so you just go knocking on doors, and hopefully a door opens, and you write a little story for the Los Angeles Free Press. It was a live review I did, and then you use that as sort of your calling card. And, hey, I had this printed in the LA Free Press. Can I come and write a story on Deep Purple for you guys at Cream and Circus, and it builds from there. So in that respect, it was amazing. The labels, I mean, it was back in the day where record labels could not spend enough money on journalists.
Right.
Like, well, we want you to interview Loggins and Messina, but they're not coming to LA, so we'll fly you to Kansas City.
So be it.
We'll put you up in a very nice hotel and get you great tickets to the shows, And on top of that, it's like, well, you need to have the Loggins and Messina T-shirt and belt buckle and garbage pail. It was just amazing. I mean, as a journalist, you were making, poverty fees. But the truth of it is, man, I said it before, I would have written for free.
Right.
It was just amazing, and as much as I hate to use the word, it's been overused, there was really a sense of community amongst all those people. So publicists at the labels and management and editors, there was like a group of people that knew each other, and I knew I could call somebody at Atlantic Records and talk to that person and say, hey, King Crimson's coming to town. I have an assignment for a magazine. Can we put something together? And they would say yes or no. And it wasn't no because, oh, we don't know you, or no, we don't like you. It was no because, no, he's not doing interviews, or there's, there were legit reasons. There was no politics involved. It was an amazing time to be a rock journalist.
You didn't specifically work for a magazine. Were you just a freelancer and just kind of went out there, contacted the label, got the story, then sold it to somebody? Is that how that worked?
That's exactly right. I was never on the staff of any magazine. I don't know that I would have had that discipline to have done that. As a freelancer, I mean, look, I was busy. I was scrambling. I was making phone calls right before the cell phone. You get on my Bakelite rotary phone, and so I was making calls, and hustling and working on stories. But I thought, writing for a magazine, now you're on these deadlines, man. You got to have your A stuff all the time, and I didn't need that. I didn't, that just wasn't me. I wasn't a trained journalist. I went to UCLA for a year, and that was a nightmare of epic proportions. And I write about that in ToneChaser. And this, English teacher said, man, you really think you're a better writer than you are, and you'll never make it as a journalist. I said, okay. And I left that year, and that's when I started really pursuing life as a freelancer. But no, I was never on the staff. I was sort of, I held the title of music editor, record editor for a couple of publications. One was called Record Review. I sort of helped start it. I was there at the beginning. So I sort of had an honorary title. But no, was never on the staff of any magazine, man. Just a
very cool. Yeah, you just kind of, it was more passion at that point too. If you didn't want to do it, you didn't want to do it.
Exactly.
So I think if you have passion for what you're going to do, you're going to enjoy meeting them a lot more as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, so I could go pursue those, all those stories I wanted to do, and go talk to all those guitar players I wanted to talk to.
Who was your first big interview? I mean, and were you nervous when you did it? Is it, or were you very comfortable around these musicians or meeting, they always say, don't meet your idol, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But who was the first person you interviewed that was big that you're like going, oh, I think I made it?
Well, the very first interview I ever did, I was in England with my buddy, left UCLA. Excuse me, I think this is like the year of 72. And I'd gotten some names and of publishers and stuff. So I was over there. We were doing like the Jack Kerouac on the road thing. We were hitchhiking around Europe and sleeping in Hyde Park. I mean, it was a fun time. And I met some people. And one of the people I met, his name was Max Clifford. And he was the manager. He was manager or the publicist. Hard to remember back then. I think he was the publicist for Joe Cocker. So I would go into, one of the red London phone booths and say, hi, my name is Steve Rosen, and I'm over here from the U.S., and I've written a couple stories, and, I don't know if you have any artists I could interview, or who knows what I said. And Max Clifford says, yeah, I've got Joe Cocker in here tomorrow. You want to interview Joe Cocker? So the first interview I ever did, I interviewed Joe Cocker, and I brought my little cheap cassette player with me, hoping that I was going to do interviews. I mean, I was so terrified. I was too stupid to know how terrified I should have been, because I wasn't prepared for a Joe Cocker interview. I mean, I knew about him. I knew about Woodstock. I loved him, but I didn't know. So, I mean, that was terrifying on that level. But in answer to your question, the first person that I was really, I thought my heart would stop, was Jeff Beck.
Oh, wow.
So this is mid 73. One of my aspirations was I always wanted to write for Guitar Player magazine.
Right.
It was one of the magazines that I had read before I started writing, And I remember looking at Guitar Player and thinking, you know what? I could do this, you know. I'm not a great guitar player, but I know about guitar. I know
Right.
about guitar players. I'm a songwriter. I understand composition. I understand recording, not in any technical sense, but enough to talk to these people, you know. And I thought I could do that. So I meet this girl, Lydia Woltag. Lydia works for a company called Gibson and Strongberg. Gibson and Strongberg were basically the first rock and roll publicity company. So they handled the Stones at that time. They handled Jeff Beck, Wild Turkey, Glenn Cornick's band. Glenn Cornick was a bass player from Jethro Tull. Steely Dan, Dr. Hook, cover of Rolling Stone. And somehow I mentioned to Lydia, I was up in her office, and again, talking about community. I would just go over to their offices, which were only about 5 minutes away from where I lived, and I'd just hang out. And I'd watch the girls work, you know, and we'd have lunch. Oh, my God, it was just so amazing. Right across the street from the famous Tower Records, you know. So he said, we're handling Jeff Beck. You want to interview Jeff Beck? And I said, Lydia, I would cut off an arm to interview Jeff Beck. So she gets on the phone and she calls Jim Crockett, the editor of Guitar Player, while I'm in the office. I can hear her talking. Yeah, Jim, we have a new writer. He's going to interview Jeff, blah, blah, blah. She gets off the phone, says, listen, he'll read the story. If he likes it, he'll run it. So fast forward to probably about a week later, Jeff is staying at the Continental Hyatt House. I go and I knock on the door. This is the 73. So this is the BBA, Beck, Bogert, and Appleseed.
Yeah.
Right. And I expect somebody else to open the door, you know, and I'm honestly, as I'm walking up the door, I'm thinking, I really don't know if I can do this. But I looked at the other side of it. I go, if I turn around now and I tell a guitar player I had a chance to do it and I didn't, who knows what they would think? You know, we're not going to use that guy. He can't even, you know what I mean? So all those things ran through my mind. So I knock on the door and he's standing there, you know, and hi, Jeff, Steve Rosen, you know, we walk in. He could not have been more gracious and open.
Yeah.
And whether he knew I was terrified or not, he knew I was extremely nervous. And, you know, if there was a silence, he'd fill it in. We're talking. It's amazing. I mean, I could have talked to him for hours. I mean, I knew every song, right? I wanted to go back to the Yardbirds. I mean, oh my God. I get to the end of the first side of the cassette and I rewind it a little bit. I guess I want to make sure the level's okay, you know, and there's nothing there. There's silence. And I rewind it a little more and there's silence. And he's watching the process. And I rewind a little more. I had hit play, but you're supposed to hit record as well. Dude, I thought this would have been worse than not showing up at all.
Right.
He's looking at it and I'm thinking he's going to say, listen, man, I can't do this again. I'm you know, he would have every right to do it. He says, oh, well, listen, don't worry about it. We'll continue from here. Come back tomorrow. I come back tomorrow. I actually brought one of my guitars. I had this beautiful 76 all maple Strat, just as a peace offering, you know.
Right.
I looked it up and he looked at it and he's playing it and you can hear him playing on the tape.
Oh, nice.
I was about 3 seconds away from saying, just take the guitar, you can have it.
Yeah.
But in answer to your question, that was terrifying for me. Subsequently, yes, I mean, you learn to control that. And it's not terror so much as just absolute infatuation. I mean, I was a guitar player, you know, playing cover bands, and I did, you know, states of things. And, you know, you meet Steve Marriott, and, you know, I did Humble Pie songs. And I mean, it was just trying not to be a total geek sitting on the other side of the microphone there. And I think that came out in the stories I wrote. I think people,
very cool.
It resonated with people. So the stories were both informative, because a lot of them were for guitar magazines, but they were also, I don't want to use entertaining, but they drew you in.
As a writer, it sounds like the tools are basically pen, pad, and a recorder with a lot of batteries. Is that kind of it?
That's kind of it. And when you don't remember to bring batteries to a Cheap Trick press conference and you got to borrow from another writer, if he had asked me, I'd say no.
Yeah.
You know, this is my press conference, you know. Or you bring in batteries that are half dead. And you listen back and it sounds good the first 10 minutes of the interview. And then it's, and you cringe and want to stick a knife in your neck. But yeah, those are the tools, man. Electric typewriter. I actually started writing on a manual, an Underwood that belonged to my mother, and I loved it, man. Seriously. But yeah, those are the tools.
Have you kept all those tapes through the years? You must have a wealth of tapes.
Yeah, I may have sold some of those. I sold the original tapes. I have copies of all that stuff.
Sure.
But to answer your question, yes, I have. They're in binders. Like little plastic binders, and have like the little cutouts for cassettes. So there's 16 in each one. I have 125 binders, so 125 times 16. And then I have everything on a hard drive and CDs.
Yeah.
And I have my little lists, so I can go know that in binder 83 is Gary Brooker and, Peter Frampton. And yeah, it's a pretty remarkable archive. I would venture to say there probably aren't many archives like that. Look, I wasn't the only writer who was writing back in the day, but I don't know if a lot of those guys, A, recorded everything, B, kept everything and chronicled it, C, did the tapes deteriorate, so it's pretty amazing. I'm pretty, I look at all those tapes and stuff, go, yeah, that's pretty cool,
Yeah, that's just a wonderful career right there. I mean, it's so amazing. Is there anyone you wanted to have an interview with that you haven't?
Simple question, simple answer. Eric Clapton.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, right, I've interviewed Jimmy Page. I interviewed Beck. I've interviewed Townsend and Blackmore and Paul Kossoff and all those guys of the era,
Yeah.
I knew the publicist for Clapton, and she had other acts that I had interviewed literally every year. And honestly, I'm not exaggerating, for at least 20 years, maybe 30 years in a row, I said, can I interview Eric? Can we put something together? I'd have like 8 assignments, cover stories over here, cover stories in European magazines, Japanese magazines.
Right.
The closest I ever got to Eric Clapton, there were two moments. I saw Derek and the Dominoes, 71 at the Santa Monica Civic. This is before I started writing.
Right.
But afterwards, he went out to his car, and as he was in his car, I had a little cheap camera. I said, Eric. And he turned and I took the picture, and I still have that picture. So that's the only word I ever said to him. And then he did the Crossroads in Dallas. I'm not sure if that was the first Crossroads. It was one of the early ones, where he'd bring all the different guitar players together. And I was in a green room, and he was standing about 10 feet away. I could not bring myself to walk over to him.
Wow.
But I never interviewed. I mean, certainly I would love to have interviewed Keith Richards, who I think probably would have been pretty cool guy. The thing about Eric is on any given day, he could be a little touchy, and he never really liked to talk about Cream, and that's all I'd want to talk about.
Is there any one characteristic you think they all have?
One characteristic. I can tell you. I can tell you what sort of astonished me about all of these guys. So typically by the time I would talk to somebody, they would have had an album out or 2 albums out. I mean, these were, it wasn't like they were guys looking for a deal, which isn't to say they weren't great players, But so on that level, the fact that these guys had been doing it for a while, they really had a complete sense of who they were and what they did as guitar players and songwriters. And they really, they were able to verbalize that stuff. I was kind of astonished by that, A question I'd always ask about, if there was some particular solo I wanted to talk about, so Joe Perry, what was, how'd you come up with that little song bits on Dream On? And they could tell you from a musical standpoint. They could tell you, well, it's an A minor, so I was thinking like that. But from more of a, how did the idea come to him, or how did the idea come to him to write the song? That answer was kind of an overriding one. Well, man, it's just kind of that thing that's out there and you have to grab it. It's very ethereal. Yeah. I don't think there are many songwriters who could really tell you, who could verbalize that. That was one.
Like Node for Node.
Yeah, exactly. That was one trait that I saw. I'll tell you, again, I interviewed a lot of guitar players, a lot of musicians, bass players, drummers, and there were more times than not. I would say 90%, maybe more, were very nice people. You know, they were open. They wanted to be there that day. They wanted to talk. They weren't rude. They weren't dismissive. You know, and going back to some of my earlier interviews, they probably weren't brilliant. And I probably had asked them questions they'd been asked 1,000 times before. Excuse me, which I tried never to do. But there were a few that were nasty. They were just nasty. You know, either they didn't want to be there, you know, they wanted to go drink, hang out with their girlfriends.
Any names you could drop with talking about having bad interviews?
Yeah, I will drop them. Todd Rundgren was impossible.
Wow.
I think Todd Rundgren is one of the most talented musicians ever. I don't think he's ever gotten his due, but I also think on the other side of that, look, I know how he treated me. Maybe he treated management or record labels differently, or his bands, though he's gone through a ton of different musicians. He was not nice at all. He was sarcastic, right. You know, and look, he can be in a bad mood. I get it. But when it's aimed at you and meant to deride you and make you feel small, you know, that's when you just want to jump over the table and you know, smash his jugular. He was not nice. Frank Zappa, very sarcastic. I mean, if you listen to his lyrics and his music, right. You know, they're kind of acerbic, and that's who he was. You know, who else? I mean, more obscure people. Doc Watkins, who was like a bluegrass guy, he was not very nice. Ray Charles, who I loved. Ray Charles was really angry.
Wow.
I remember I brought one of his albums. You know, he had like 50 albums or 100 records. I mean, it was unbelievably prolific. And I brought a record. You know, I said, you know, would you please sign this for me? And he said, I don't sign anything I can't see. Okay. Yeah. Richie Blackmore. It's funny. I just put up a post on my Facebook today about Richie. I don't know what it was. I had written about Richie. Richie was only in a good mood when everyone else around him felt bad.
Wow.
And he was just one of those guys, man. Just, I don't know what it was. Now, on the other side of that, I interviewed Richie in, I think it was late 77, for what would be one of the covers I did for Guitar Player in 78. I think it was February 78. And he was amazing. He was friendly and open, and he talked about everything. Now, I don't know if this is the reason, but maybe he knew that he was sitting for the cover of Guitar Player magazine, and right. Don't piss the writer off, right? Don't make this guy angry. Maybe I don't get the cover. That wouldn't have been the case. It wasn't my right. It wasn't my decision to put him on the cover. But you know, Richie, you know, not so nice. And I write about a couple episodes in the book. One of them introducing Edward to Richie Blackmore, and oh my God, what he did to Edward was horrifying.
Yeah, I want to talk about Eddie Van Halen. So from 1977 through 2003, you had a personal and professional relationship with Edward Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen. In the mid-'80s, from my understanding, you were contracted to write an authorized biography. It was never finished. That's where we kind of have the ToneChaser book. But talk a little bit about that experience, because from my understanding, I mean, I always considered Van Halen and Eddie Van Halen just like a very close-knit group. They don't let a lot of outsiders in. I mean, how did that friendship spark? And talk a little bit about the book as well.
Van Halen camp were very close. Obviously, it was always the brothers and everybody else. But, you know, even the guys in the band, it was a closed system for sure. I meet Edward on a random night in July 77 at the Whiskey A Go-Go, the famous whiskey. Cheap Trick was recording a live record. It was like a promotional record for the label. Right. The following year, they'd record the Budokan record and blow up. But in 77, they were still, you know, not so big. So they were there at the Whiskey recording a live record. I thought, that's going to be amazing to watch. So I was there with my brother, and we're waiting for Cheap Trick to come on. Michelle Meyer, who booked the whiskey, taps me on the shoulder. We say hello. I knew Michelle. She was a sweetheart. He knew everything that was going on in Hollywood musically. If it was worth knowing about, Michelle was there. She was there first. She knew everything. He said, listen, there's somebody upstairs you have to meet. She knew I was into guitar players and was always looking for the next new guitar player. So we go upstairs, and I see the guy standing in the corner. Pretty certain I recognize him. So you have to understand, in 1977, there were no stories on them. There was no Cream or Circus stories. Nobody had ever even interviewed them, to my knowledge,
Right.
at least not on any national label. I mean, national scale. They were still kind of a local band that had made good. They did have the deal with Warner Brothers, but that album would not come out until February the following year. So that was still 8 months away. They were still playing the whiskey while signed to Warner. He walked me over, and Eddie Van Halen, Steve Rosen, Eddie Van Halen, Godhead. And Edward he smiles when he hears Michelle say that. Michelle using the term Godhead was her description for the greater than human being. When you're Godhead, you are the top of the mountain. No one can touch you. You are the greatest. So we just begin talking, and you asked me before about the one that got away, Eric Clapton. Well, we start talking about Clapton. How we started talking about Clapton, I don't know. I would think that Edward must have brought it up, because it's not the kind of thing I would have said, well, what do you think about Eric Clapton? I would have started a conversation with, what do you think about Jeff Beck? Because Jeff was my favorite. But somehow we start talking about Clapton, and he's insightful and he knows a lot about him. I also knew a lot about Clapton. And when I'd have a discussion with somebody, if they made a statement about Clapton that I deemed was below my threshold of what you have to know about Eric Clapton, I would not talk to you any longer. So if they said to me, yeah, well, didn't Eric Clapton play in a band called Cream before solo record? I go, that's it. I'm done, So, right. So not that I wanted Edward to say something where I could feel that way, but, I figured, well, he liked Clapton and, fair enough. But with Ed, it was different. He maybe didn't know the history of Eric, but he understood Eric as a player. So he was talking about his finger vibrato and his sound and, his phrasing. And I thought, wow, this guy knows stuff way deeper than me. I mean, I sort of understood that stuff. I couldn't have verbalized it. So we keep talking. The conversation's amazing. Again, the conversation could have been 30 minutes, an hour, hard to remember. It just seemed like the time flew by. He runs out of the room, and he comes back, and he's got a pen. And he picks up a scrap of paper off the dressing room floor of the whiskey, and he's writing something, and he hands it to me, and I'm looking, it's his phone number. And he says, hey, man, really nice meeting you. Call me. So that's where it started. I would go on to interview him many times, and every time we met, it was just so great, And somebody said, well, when do you think you became friends with Edward? Honestly, without trying to sound, spiritual or Zen or something, I think it happened that first night. It was just, man.
Yeah.
You connect with somebody, and I think what it really was
sounds like it. Yeah.
He felt comfortable around me. And the other thing was, and again, I think this is important, is that I met him before the first record comes out, before they go out on tour for the first time. So, again, he's a pretty big local phenomenon,
Right.
People talk about Edward Van Halen, this guitar player, but he's not Edward Van Halen. After that first record comes out,
the Eruption guy, right? Yeah.
Right, and Eruption, and blowing Journey and Montrose off the stage.
Sure.
All that thing. And I think in the back of Edward's head, I think maybe he thought about that. Well, Steve met me when, I wasn't like this huge star. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if he specifically thought about it, but maybe he thought, well, yeah, the guy's not just trying to hang out with me because of who I am.
Who he is, yeah.
And I'm sure that must have happened to him a lot. I mean, look, I had so much respect for the guy. It was ridiculous. And every minute I was around him, I never lost sight of the fact that, holy God, this is the next generation of guitar players.
Right.
I mean, he is once in a lifetime. But then I'd have to pull back from that and just like be the friend. But then I'd have to take on a different sort of persona when I would interview him, you know? So it was little things, and I write about those things in the book. It was a very unique situation. I don't think any other writer has ever undergone that. At least they never did with Edward. No other writer ever had that relationship. But yeah, man, it just kept growing. Later on, Edward changed a little bit. The relationship changed. I don't want to give the book away, but yeah, for 26 years, off and on, I was part of his life in one way or another.
So is the book a book on Eddie Van Halen? Is it a book on Van Halen? It's a book on you and Eddie's relationship and that kind of thing? What is it? What can the reader expect from all this?
I mean, it's really about Edward. People have said, well, man, it's really about you as well. But I'm really just a byproduct. You know, it's not a memoir. It's not all about me and, oh, yes, here's this section about when I met Edward Van Halen. It's not that. But I do give some of that context so people understand who I was when I met him and that I was still doing interviews while hanging out with him. But no, it's not about Van Halen. I mean, certainly the other guys come up and I talk about the tours, but no, it's not about the history of Van Halen. It's not about Edward as a technical guitar player, though that's in there because I go back to some of the early interviews I did, you know, for Guitar World, you know, and I revisit those and sort of explode those out and talk about what that was really like sitting there with him doing those interviews. But no, primarily it's about Edward.
Along with meeting Eddie Van Halen in 1977, you also interviewed another popular guitarist in the same year, that of course being Jimmy Page. Led Zeppelin were known for not giving many interviews, so hearing you'll have a chance to interview Jimmy Page must have been a thrill. What do you remember from that experience?
I remember a lot from that experience.
How old were you in 1977 anyway?
I was 24.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, and thinking about it now, so I was out, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So I was out, I believe it was April or May, and then I would meet Edward in July.
Wow.
You know, it's funny. Well, I mean, I wouldn't have known, but I thought that I may have brought that up to him. Hey, Ed, I just interviewed Jimmy Page. You know, I figure, you know, for some reason I didn't, but in any event. So yes, I was in the thick of writing for Guitar Player. I'd been writing for Guitar Player magazine for about 4 years at that point. Excuse me. I knew that Zeppelin were touring in 77. So I actually probably started calling. First, I reached out to Guitar Player. Hey, man, if I could get a Jimmy Page interview, would you run it? They go, of course, you know, we'll put it on the cover, you know. That would be unbelievable. We all knew that Zeppelin hated the press. Press would criticize them and critique them. So I figure I was fighting a losing battle from the get-go. But I thought, you know, what do I have to lose? I started calling Swan Song in New York at least 6 months earlier. I could have been calling them for a year.
Right.
Somehow I knew, or I had met Janine Safer, who was the publicist at Swan Song, and Abe Huck, who was like the main publicist over there. And Danny Goldberg was a name that I knew. I didn't really know too well. So I just started sending letters. I think I would call and, you know, hey, you know, I'm calling again, you know, Guitar Player would love to do a cover and they're not doing press. They're not doing press. They're not doing press. And then I call one time and they go, yeah, they'll talk to you. And I cannot believe this. So this is probably early 77. So the way that Zeppelin toured, and it was pretty brilliant actually, which they had sort of, they had come up with the concept on earlier tours, and they gotten so big that it was, it was difficult for them to actually go through normal airports, right? They would have been swamped.
Right.
So Peter Grant, who's, man, you gotta give it to Peter Grant.
Yep.
So he thought, well, listen, what if we could charter our own plane? We could park at the private tarmac at any given airport. We'll put the lads in a limo them to the awaiting private jet, fly into a gig. After the gig, take the limo back to the private tarmac,
right,
get on the plane, fly back.
So they just have a base station of where they're staying at. So throughout North America, they're like, we'll stay in New York, we'll stay in Chicago for all these days. So it works out good for them too.
I mean, you could do gigs that were 1,000 miles away and only be on an airplane for an hour.
Right.
So that's what they did. So in '77, that was their modus operandi. They based in Chicago. I remember it was the Drake Hotel, very, very nice hotel. And they would fly out to gigs. So I fly out. There's a car waiting for me, and they take me back to the Drake Hotel. So basically, I'm kind of ushered to my room, and they said, here are the rules. I go, okay.
Rules.
Literally, man. Don't talk to any of the band. Don't, never talk to Peter Grant. Don't make eye contact with John Bonham. I mean, look, man, they could have told me, you got to give blood at the door. I would have done that.
Right.
So, hearing that stuff, it's like, hey, it's Led Zeppelin. They said, you've got to stay by the phone. We do not know when Jimmy will want to talk to you. You better make yourself available. So actually, the way it turned out was I was hoping also to interview John Paul Jones. That happened. That probably happened a couple days in. I only had to wait a couple days.
Okay.
They say, hey, John Paul Jones, would like to talk. And I go, great. So I go to his room, and he was as accommodating and as open and honest. I mean, he was remarkable, and I knew a lot about John Paul Jones. I knew that all the studio stuff he'd done, and his paths actually crossed with Jimmy's, because Jimmy obviously was a big studio guy. Not a lot is often spoken about that. That's really where they, it's not like they were strangers when Page said, oh, who can I find for a bass player? Who's this John Paul Jones guy? In any event, he was amazing. I mean, literally, we talked, man, it had to be at least an hour and a half, 2 hours. And it was amazing.
Oh, very cool.
And what really struck me was how much he really loved the band. Look, he's in arguably the biggest band in the world at the time, but I think from day one, I think him being in Zeppelin was everything. I mean, he was devoted to the band.
He brought a lot to he brought a lot. Right.
So, so it's maybe the next day or the day after, the phone rings, the magic phone. I pick up the phone.
Is it Jimmy?
Calling me because nobody else knows I'm there.
Right.
Hi, Jimmy will talk to you now. So I get everything ready. I had my cassette player. I mean, I was all ready, waiting for that phone call. So there's a knock at the door, and literally, two of the security guys walked me to his room. Now I'm on, I forget, the 8th floor. They're on the penthouse floor, right?
Right.
Whatever that is. And literally, it's like dead man walking. There's like one of these guys in front of me. I'm in the middle, and there's the guy behind me. Like what? As if I'm going to go into Jimmy's room and
right. What you're going to expect, yeah.
God, it was just amazing, really.
For real.
Because I mean, they were royalty. I mean, my God, right? They were, and I was a journalist, and I was an unknown entity, and they ushered me to his door, and I think they knocked on the door and they took off because they did not come inside with us, which I thought was great because I've done interviews before where there's been a publicist who wants to sit in or a manager, man, and it even if they don't say a word, they're just in the corner. That dynamic is there, man.
Right.
And that other, beating heart, it throws off the chemistry.
Like having a lawyer in the room.
Exactly. So I kind of knock, and he answers, and I told you before about, who was I terrified, and I say Jeff Beck. Well, my God, Jimmy Page, this is, it's Jimmy Jimmy Page in '77 at Zeppelin.
Right. There must be an aura around the band, and of course, Jimmy. So you just
Oh
don't
my
know what to
God.
expect when you walk in the door. If it's going to be candles and drapes and everything's dark, you don't know.
Exactly. You really don't know, you know. And all of it was true, and none of it was true. So I walk in, and you know, he's got a beautiful suite. And,
Yeah.
hey, okay, it's Jimmy Page, you know. I look at the wall. I'm walking in, you know, and I look at the wall, and there is a huge, I mean, a huge hole in the wall. And I'm looking at it, and I look down, and there's like a telephone, you know, a wall telephone is on the carpet, you know. The plaster is there. It's all over the phone, you know. And I'm looking at it, and I'm kind of looking at him. I'm not going to say anything, you know. And
Right.
then he sees me looking, and he says, well, you know, the fucking telephone, you know, it keeps ringing, you know, and if you take it off the hook, you know, it makes the noise, and you don't want to talk to anybody. So what can you do, you know? So I ripped it out of the wall.
Wow.
So I thought, oh my God, he ripped the phone out of the wall. I mean, on one level, it was really perfect, right?
Right.
On
Right.
another level, it was a little intimidating. Let's be honest about it. So we sit down, and I tried to explain to him what I wanted to do. I literally, I probably had, right, this is in the days of typewriters. I was using a manual typewriter. This is before I was even using an electric.
Right.
I must have had 20 pages of questions. I mean, I wanted to talk to him about every section he'd ever done and every guitar. And so this is 77. So I think this is Presence.
Mm-hmm.
So I had questions about it, you know, I mean, I knew in my mind, one, because Zeppelin rarely did interviews.
Right.
Two, that Jimmy hardly ever did interviews. Three, I want this to be the most unbelievable guitar-centric interview that he's ever done or ever will do. I really knew that not many writers were ever going to get this opportunity. And it's like, I felt like, my God, it's a cover story for a guitar player. This has to be the greatest interview I've ever done. I mean, I really felt that way. That's what I wanted to bring to it. So we sit down, and he was pretty cool. You know, and I started, you know, Jimmy, when did you start playing? And what was your first guitar? And it was a Grazioso.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to also remember that back in the day, Grazioso, so I'm trying to understand what he's saying. Grazioso, you know, and I can't ask him to repeat the name of it, and I can't ask him to spell it. You know,
Right. You just go with it. Yeah.
And I'm fast forwarding. When I sent this story to Guitar Player, they said, well, did you check? And they specifically said, did you check the spelling of Grazioso? We can't find it.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? So, you know, it was that kind of thing. And he's a really soft-spoken guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really thick Birmingham accent, you know. So he talks about this.
Yeah.
Loud, you know, and you know, so I'm bending over, and I'm trying not to stick the microphone down his throat. And he was cool. He was really cool. At one point early on in the interview, he said to me, he goes, you know what? This really is an important interview, you know.
Oh, wow.
We're going to do this great. I'm not exactly sure of his wording, but he was aware of what that moment was.
Cool.
So we keep talking, and he goes into the bathroom.
Mm.
I don't know what he did in the bathroom. He was drinking out of a bottle of Jack,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I thought, okay, he drinks. I mean, you know,
Right.
I don't care if he had an IV going into his arm, you know, just so long as he, you know, stayed on track, and, you know, but he'd go into the bathroom, you know, he'd come back, and I mean, you could tell.
Right. Something happened. He's, yeah.
You know, I don't know. I don't even want to conjecture, but he came back, and he was a little less there than he was before.
Right.
So we keep talking, you know, and now I'm at the first Zeppelin record, and he goes, yeah, you know, and I used the Les Paul for something, you know. I go, well, Jimmy, I'm sorry, wasn't that the Telecaster? He goes, oh, right.
Oh, wow.
You know, so now I'm correcting him, but it was still cool, you know. I mean, there was still some insights, and you know, what he called his guitar army, the way that he would build tracks, and nobody built guitar tracks like Jimmy Page. Hendrix was a master at it. You know, you think about what Jimmy was doing in 66 and 67. I mean,
Right.
before Jimmy was doing with Zeppelin even. But the way Page, you know, would layer the acoustics and
Yep.
my God, it was just amazing. And that's what he called his guitar army, you know. And he was, again, he was pretty open. At times he was confrontational. I think it's just because, I don't know, man, maybe because he was getting wrecked or drunk or high.
Yeah,
and
right.
I don't know. So we talked for about, I want to say 45 minutes, maybe longer. And I thought, my God, this is a great start.
Right.
You know, I'd gotten through literally a quarter of the questions. I figured, okay, you know, part two. I don't even know if I had seen a gig before I talked to him. But, you know, at that point, I would see a couple gigs. You know, again, I'd be in a limo by myself, and they'd take me to the private tarmac in Chicago. At O'Hare, private planes were, you know. And, you know, so I'm on the Starship. And, you know, you go in, man, and it's decked out. It doesn't look like the inside of a normal airplane.
Yeah.
It has like these, like separate, like little lounge areas. And in the back, literally, were bedrooms for the band. John Paul Jones had an organ in one room, you know. We're coming back from one of the gigs. I think it was St. Louis. And the gig was amazing. And I mean, it was sold out, you know. And so Janine says, hey, Jimmy, we'll talk to you a little bit again for the rest of the flight. So I go, oh, killer, you know. So I go over and sit by him. And now I not only have to contend with him speaking in a very soft voice
Right.
and the accent, there's now all the white noise from a freaking jet airplane flying 550 miles an hour. So I'm seated at this little lounge area and I'm facing him, you know. And I've literally got the microphone out there, you know, almost in front of his face. I mean, he was cool. I mean, just done this amazing gig. And we were talking. And there's a tap on my shoulder, a pretty rough tap. And I turn around and I see it's John Paul Jones with two of his, they each had their own security.
Right.
Two of his security guys. I mean, these guys were monster
Right.
guys.
Yeah.
You didn't screw with them. You didn't look at, and I'm looking at him and, you know, I'm thinking, oh, he's just messing around. He knows how much I was,
Right.
you know, love to be there and what a great conversation we had. And he's goofing with the journalist, right? So I turn back around and went to Jimmy and I continue talking and he taps me a little harder.
Oh, wow.
I look at him, you know, and I kind of stand up to say, oh, hey, man, what's going on, you know? So I stand up, you know, and I'm looking at him and he's looking at me and he doesn't look happy. And I still think he's messing around, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Because you are a fucking asshole. I'm going to fucking kill you.
Wow. From
And
John
now I
Paul
think-
Jones?
Yeah, man, he was mad.
Yeah.
I think at this point I say, I pray that he's joking.
Right.
And I'm kind of there mute, you know?
Yeah.
And he says again, I fucking hate you. You're not doing any fucking interviews.
Wow.
I'm going to myself, my God, what is going on? What did I say to him? What transpired between the time? I mean, I didn't even see him again.
Right.
In his hand, in fact, I could go get the issue if you wanted to see it. In his hand is this like rolled up, like you roll up a magazine.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm thinking, and I go, oh my God. Guitar player in 73. And we talked about my Jeff Beck story. That was the first story I ever did for Guitar Player, which turned out to be a cover story.
Oh.
Guitar Player put together a compendium of a bunch of interviews. They put my Jeff Beck story on the cover of this amazing compilation called Rock Guitarist Volume 1. I had gotten some copies of it and I thought, how cool would this be? I'm going to bring a copy to John Paul and to Jimmy. It's sort of like peace offerings. Hey, I'm kind of legit. I interviewed Jeff Beck, you know, your good buddy.
Yeah, yeah.
What I had forgotten until that moment was in the first paragraph of that story. And again, this is the first interview I've ever done for a guitar player. So maybe I'm probably trying to make a name for myself, you know?
Right.
So I go, of the three great English guitar players, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, and Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton has turned into like a country hillbilly because his solo records I hated. Jimmy Page has done nothing more than copy Jeff Beck's Truth album, and Jeff Beck is the only one who's gone on to do great things.
Oops.
All of that flashes through my mind. You know, it's like one of those things, you know, when you're dying, your whole life flashes in front of you. My entire journalism career flashed before me. And I'm looking at it and thinking, oh my God, John Paul Jones read that story and that's what he read.
Right.
What do I say to him? I didn't mean a word of it. I love Zeppelin. Being there was an honor, but there's nothing I could say. I had lied to him. I had done exactly what other journalists had said they do. We love Zeppelin. And then they'd walk away and write a scathing review. I didn't know what to do. I thought if he comes at me, I wasn't afraid of taking on John Paul Jones because he was kind of a meek English guy. What I was afraid of were his bouncers.
The two bodyguards,
out the side door. They weren't going to do that, of course, but I'm speechless. I go, oh my God, I am so sorry. He says, fuck you. Give me all your tapes.
Oh, jeez.
So I had to give him back the tapes I had done with him and the tapes, including that one there with Jimmy. So there were like 4 or 5 cassettes. I mean, what was I going to do? Say no?
Right.
And he said, that's it. I probably could have stayed on the road with him, probably indefinitely, which makes me crazy to think about.
Right.
But I thought at this point in time, my God, nothing's going to happen. Maybe, not they weren't going to beat me up, but life was going to be miserable.
Right. You're not going to be included in that Led Zeppelin camp anymore, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I told Janine, because she's on the plane, she sees the whole thing happening. I get back there. By now, by the time you get back to the hotel after the plane flight, it's about 3 a.m. I say, Janine, I'm going home. I'm going to book a flight tomorrow morning. She says, go apologize to John Paul Jones. I go, I can't. I don't even know what to say to him. She said, and he knew. She said, go apologize to him. So I go up to his room. I knock on his door, and he's still up, And I prostrated myself. I tried to explain to him I was a brand new journalist, or I had only been writing a little bit. I'd met nothing of that. I have such respect for you and the band, He goes, I still think you're a fucking asshole, but you had a job to do. Here are your cassettes. I thought,
nice.
I'll tell you, man, anybody else would have trashed those cassettes. Right. And he would have had every right to do so. Fast forward 4 or 5 months later, Detective is playing at the Starwood. Detective is I think the second band that was signed to Swanson.
With Michael.
That company's the first.
Yeah.
Their boutique label. And I've told my brother this whole story, and so we're upstairs in what's called the VIP room at the Starwood. And I'm sitting there with my brother, and Mick says, oh, John Paul Jones is sitting over at that table. No, that's a riot, Mick. You're really funny. He goes, John Paul Jones is standing up and he's walking over here. I go, Mick, that's really funny, There's a tap on my shoulder and I turn around and it's John Paul Jones. And I'm thinking, oh my God.
Another tap.
Oh my God. I stand up ready to be, berated and belittled again.
Right.
And he puts out his hand, shake his hand. That issue with Jimmy Page had come out.
Right.
And the story, as much as I would have loved to have interviewed Jimmy Moore, it was really good. It was a really good story. And the story with John Paul was amazing. He obviously had read that, and he said to me, man, I saw what you did, and I read it, and it was really good. I am so sorry for what I said and did to you. And he hugs me.
Wow.
It's like, it's like a fairy tale ending.
Yeah. Well, and there's also the famous picture of you sitting with Jimmy Page in the Starship, which I guess would be pretty great or really cool for you to see. Because, that one circulates on the internet all the time. But That must be really good.
Oh, absolutely. And I have to tell you, you know, if you ask me, what interview has garnered more responses and letters from people, without a doubt, it was that Jimmy Page cover in guitar.
Right.
I mean, I did some monster interviews for them. You know, I mean, again, Jeff Beck and who were those other covers? John Entwistle. I mean, I'd done major features, you know, Page. They wanted to know about Page. And again, you know, in my thinking at the time when I was doing it, 1977, nobody knows what kind of strings Jimmy Page used.
Right.
What amp he was using on those speakers, man, you know, and I did a good job.
Yes, you did.
It could have been better had I had more time, but it was really good, you know.
Yeah.
I'm pretty critical about what I do. But yes, that picture and some of the pictures, I have one of the pictures, it's not signed, and the other one is signed.
Oh, cool.
And the way that the one is signed is 77. So what is that? 9 years later, as we talked about a little bit previously, Mark, I interviewed Jimmy again with the firm in Daytona Beach, Florida, and I take the picture with me, and Jimmy signs it. I don't think he had any idea who I was.
Right.
He looks at the picture and he signs it. I mean, look.
Priceless, though.
Yeah. Not that he should have remembered me, but it's like, come on, Jimmy, it's you know, it's your first huge cover, and
right.
You know, how many guys come to you with pictures from the start, you know? But that interview, man, you know, we talked about it. He was not nice. He was mean.
For 1986, right?
86.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a quote from that. So I wanted to read that to you before we dive in.
Oh, okay.
This was for the July 1986 Guitar World, an issue dedicated to Jimmy Page. So this is a quote from you. Page eyed the list of questions, and after I explained that our talk would revolve around more of an overview of his work with the firm and Led Zeppelin than an in-depth probe into playing techniques, guitars, and such, he took a swallow of his gin and tonic, and we were on our way. I took a long swallow myself of oxygen, let out a deep breath, and tried to calm the thundering of my heart. I couldn't. I am assuming Jimmy Page still brings a little nervousness to you when you meet him. Is that what it was? Or
oh my God, absolutely. And see, it's funny, man. Part of me was hoping he would remember me, and part of me was hoping he wouldn't remember. You know, and the strangest thing during that whole episode, John Paul Jones, I don't know if John Paul Jones ever talked to Jimmy and said, yeah, that guy wrote that shit about it. You know, I don't know if that ever happened. And I don't know if Jimmy ever knew what was going on at all. You know, so it was strange.
Right.
So yeah, man. Yeah. Sitting there with Jimmy Page. I mean, you never get blasé about that. You know, and again, he was curt, and he was kind of sarcastic and kind of just angry.
Just real quick, and you're referring to the 86 interview, and I think that was posted on one of the Led Zeppelin forum boards, and it was a lot of the feedback that other members saw. That's like, wow, Jimmy seems really testy in this. So yeah, it definitely comes across. So you did an amazing job as far as getting that across. But yeah, there was definitely something there for sure.
Exactly, and again, you know, I really, really try to be honest in the interviews I do. So when Jimmy would say, hey, that's a stupid question, or hey, you know, or he'd make one of those remarks, I didn't have to put that in there, you know, because it makes me look like a moron too, because here I'm sitting with Jimmy Page and I'm being belittled, you know, into 1,000 pieces. But the honesty of it was that's what happened. And I think when people read that, they really get a sense of who he is. People might say, oh, well, Rosen's just too thin-skinned, you know. It's like, well, maybe so, but I'll tell you what, man, you go sit there in front of Jimmy Page for an hour and let him say those things to you. I was susceptible to migraines back in the day, but it was just the anxiety and you know, I built up my head. It was just an attention headache, you know, and it was building and it's building and it's building, and I can barely focus, you know. So I get through that. I go back to my room and do get sick because migraines would make you do.
Right.
And then Neil Preston, who was Van Halen,
I'm with you.
Zepp's photographer,
Right.
took pictures for the cover. You know, it's that great cover with Jimmy with the
Yep.
acoustic and the Telecaster.
Classic.
And we took some photos, and those have been
I've seen this.
put up.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, man. He's smiling and he's got his arm,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like, where were you like an hour ago, pal? But you know, to have interviewed him not only once but twice in that '86 interview, you know, I was like, I thought to myself, I'm just not going to sit here and be poked constantly by him. You know,
Right.
I don't know if I thought consciously, but it's like, you know, you can't say something to him. Hey, man, just, you know, that would have backfired.
Right. Right.
But at that time, this is '86, you know, I was writing the book on Edward. You know, I thought, well, let me ask Jimmy about Edward Van Halen. So I asked him a question, you know, and the first one was kind of a general question. Hey, you know, you must know about Edward Van Halen. And he said something like, yeah, you know, I can appreciate his technique, you know, and he says, I can't play like that, but I can appreciate what he did. And then I asked him another question and another question. And, you know, I could tell he was getting a little upset about that. He goes, you know, I said, well, he's my friend. He goes, yeah, I know he's your friend, you know. And I could tell he was getting a little, you know, peeved by it, you know. And I thought, oh, okay. Hey, fair enough, man. You've been doing it to me for the last 45 minutes. And then he says at the end, he says, well, I can't smile like him.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, okay, that's enough. Let me move on now, you know. In the book, there's a section at the very back called Van Halen's Voices, where I have done like a little oral narrative, and I've taken excerpts from interviews I've done with a lot
Right.
of musicians, friends, a lot of people that I interviewed for the original book, and put that in there, you know. And I took a little bit from Jimmy and, you know, put that in there. I can't smile like him. I honestly don't know how much Jimmy really did listen to Edward. I think that's legitimate. But then years later,
Yeah.
there's a famous pictures of them
At the rock walk.
you know, they're right there. They're close buddies. You know,
Yeah.
history gets rewritten a lot. You know, look, I'm sure that Jimmy had a lot of respect for Edward, whether Edward was one of his favorite guitar players or not. I mean, you know, if he wasn't, fair enough.
Steve, I can't thank you enough. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you know, when I was researching it, just Jimmy Page is such a sliver of your career. So I appreciate you coming on, talking about your experience with Jimmy Page, but everything you've done is just simply amazing. And it'll be embedded in the Rock and Roll Writers Hall of Fame. But to wrap it up, tell our fans about ToneChaser, where to get it, what website.
Cool. So ToneChaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen, is now in its third edition. The first three editions are essentially the same text. I probably did some editing and copy corrections, you know, between the first and second and third editions, but the text is pretty much the same. Covers are different. This third edition, the one that's currently out, has an expanded photo section. I mean, there's some really remarkable photos of Edward in there. You can obtain the book at on my webpage. Very simple, ToneChaserBooks.com, all one word, ToneChaserBook.com. You can also find the book on Amazon, eBay, Reverb, and Etsy. I have a Facebook page. You know, I think if you just type in ToneChaser, you can find me. I have an Instagram page, which is at steve.rosen.guitar.pics. I sell collectible guitar picks.
Oh, cool.
On eBay under the name Spirit Nation. If anybody's looking for Metallica or, you know, Bon Jovi picks, I sell those on eBay. And I also have a YouTube page. And again, I think it's Steve Rosen. I think you type in ToneChaser. And the YouTube page is pretty cool. I put up some audio, some original audio from my Van Halen interviews. I just put up like a 5-hour interview, pretty rare, with Alex Van Halen, done in '86. That's when I was going to work on the Van Halen Edwards authorized biography, and I was sitting on this Alex Van Halen interview. It's really pretty amazing. But But beyond that, there's a Jeff Beck interview up there. There's the 86 interview with Page. That's amazing. And you can hear that. And
Yeah.
folks, if I exaggerate, if he's not
have a listen to it. You don't believe it in print. It's there.
Exactly. You let me know. There's some other really great interviews. I think David Gilmour. I think I have a Pete Townsend up there. But it's pretty fun. There's some very cool stuff up there. So yeah, man, I hope you go and check out the Van Halen book. You know, if you're a fan of my writing and you've read my stuff over the years, I mean, I really believe that the writing in the ToneChaser book is kind of the best writing I've ever done. So yeah.
Very good. Well, Steve, thanks again for everything you've done. You have a good day.
Very nice, Mark. Thank you, buddy.